Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
They booked an entire island and left me a text that said, "You probably wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway." That sentence hit harder than the silence that had been creeping up for months. It wasn't the words that cut the deepest. It was the effortless cruelty hiding behind their fake concern, the patronizing tone wrapped up in a smiley face I could practically hear in their voices. That morning, I stood barefoot in my kitchen, staring at my phone like it had just slapped me across the face. I read it again, slowly this time, hoping the meaning would somehow soften. But it didn't. It sat there on the screen, smug and final. You probably wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway. It was Lindsay's number, of course. It's always Lindsay when something needs to be said without anyone really saying it. God forbid someone just be honest anymore. No one had the guts to call me. Not one of them. Not even Sandra, who used to bring me soup when I was sick and cried next to me in my driveway the night David left. Not Amy, who used to swear we were soul sisters over 2-for-1 margaritas. Not even Claire, who couldn't keep a secret if you paid her but suddenly managed radio silence when it came to this. I walked over to the table, sat down slowly, and opened my laptop. I didn't have to go far. There it was, posted just 30 minutes ago, a photo of all of them, glowing and golden under a sprawling tropical sunset, drinks raised high, laughter frozen mid-frame. You could practically hear the waves and the Spotify playlist in the background. 9 people. No, wait. 10. That included David. David. My ex-husband. My ex was in the damn photo. He was laughing, holding a glass of something probably overpriced, one hand around Amy's waist like it belonged there now. My friends. My people. I stared at that photo until my vision blurred, not from tears, but from something hotter, sharper. Something I didn't have a name for yet. And hey-race the kicker, Lindsay was wearing the necklace I gave her last Christmas. The one she said she wore only for special moments. Guess I wasn't special enough anymore. Looking back, the signs were there. They always are, but we want to believe we're imagining things. That we're being paranoid, insecure, overthinking. I remembered when Lindsay forgot to invite me to her rooftop birthday by accident because the invite must have bounced. I remembered when Amy said she was too tired to go out for dinner and then posted a story from the wine bar with the others. I remembered Claire acting weird when I showed up at brunch that one time. I wasn't supposed to see the group, but they'd apparently been meeting for months without me. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was sensitive, that maybe I had pulled away first. But no, they had pulled away. One thread at a time, until I was hanging alone at the end of a frayed rope, wondering what I had done wrong. I wasn't loud enough. I didn't post enough photos. I didn't make enough jokes. I didn't take sides when David cheated, because hell, I was too busy trying to keep myself breathing. I set my phone face down on the table and sat in silence, the kind of silence that makes your own breathing sound like thunder. I could feel my heart knocking against my ribs like it wanted out. I wanted to scream, to smash something, to run into that picture and drag every single one of them by the collar until they remembered who the hell I was. But I didn't do any of that. I stood up, walked to the bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out the small fireproof safe from the back. I hadn't touched it in years. Inside were things I kept not because I needed them, but because I never wanted to forget who I had been. A faded hospital badge from my nursing days. A photo of me and my mother on her last birthday. A hotel key from a weekend I never told anyone about. And beneath all that, one envelope, sealed and addressed in my own handwriting. To me. I held it for a long moment, like it might whisper something if I waited long enough. I didn't open it. Not yet. I placed it on the nightstand, next to the lamp that flickered every time it rained. I walked back into the kitchen, poured myself a drink I didn't want, and sat back down at the table. I picked up my phone again, stared at the group photo one more time. I looked at each face, studied them, like I was trying to memorize the details for a test I hadn't studied for. I moved my finger to the group chat, hovered over the text box. But I didn't type anything. I didn't call. I didn't confront. I didn't beg. Because I knew something they didn't. I had been pushed out, yes. But that meant I was free now. And I had one thing none of them expected. Time. And a plan. But first, the letter. I used to think I was lucky to have them in my life. These women who laughed with me at weddings and cried with me at funerals, who brought casseroles when my dad passed and held my hand during chemo scares, who once drove all the way across town just to hold me while I sobbed on the bathroom floor because David hadn't come home the night before. We met slowly over the years, through overlapping circles of kids, school events, community fundraisers, holiday potlucks, and wine nights that started innocent and ended in confessions whispered over half-empty bottles. Lindsay was the glue in the group, the bright one, always organizing, always in control of the calendar, the mood, the seating chart, the soundtrack. If Lindsay approved of you, you were in. If she didn't, well, you'd find out eventually. I never realized how much of my life had become about being the version of me they liked best. The calm one. The listener. The fixer. The one who remembered birthdays and showed up early to help set up. The one who didn't make drama. I learned to laugh when I didn't want to. I kept secrets I didn't agree with. I downplayed hurt feelings to keep the peace. They used to say things like, "Joe's just so easy to be around," and I wore that like a badge of honor. I thought it meant they loved me. Maybe they did. Or maybe they just loved that I never asked them for anything they weren't willing to give. When David and I split, they were there. Kind of. Lindsay was the first to call. She said all the right things, told me he was an idiot, told me I was brave. Amy showed up with vodka and trash TV. Claire brought me a weighted blanket, said it helped her during her own breakup. Sandra cried more than I did. I believed them. I believed they were heartbroken for me, with me, beside me. But grief is a great disguise, and I didn't notice then that they were already choosing sides. Slowly, subtly. Like removing bricks one at a time from a wall they knew I'd eventually lean against. It started small and stupid. "Oh, I didn't know you weren't on that email." Or, "We were just talking about that last week at Lindsay's. Didn't you get the invite?" Then came the jokes. They called them divorce jokes, as if pain was funnier when it came with wine and a wink. Amy once said, "Joe, you're living the dream now, no man, no kids, no rules." I laughed, but I hated it. I hated how they turned my loneliness into something to envy, how they pretended like I'd been set free, when in truth, I was just unclaimed baggage at a carousel no one came back to. I think the first time I truly saw it, really saw it, was at Claire's birthday dinner, the one at that overpriced Italian place with the dry pasta and loud jazz trio. I arrived on time, but the table was already half full, and Lindsay had shifted the chairs so I was at the far end. I spent 2 hours trying to keep up with conversations that drifted away the second I spoke. No one asked me anything real. They asked about work, my garden, whether I still had that dog. I never had a dog, and then smiled too brightly when I said I was fine. The dessert came, and no one offered me a bite. That night, I went home and cried for 2 hours without even taking off my shoes. But I stayed. God help me, I stayed. Because it's terrifying to admit that the people you thought were your safe place were actually just a waiting room. A comfortable little purgatory that held you until someone more interesting walked in. And then, the island. The private island. 10 of them. Or maybe 8. Wait, was it 7? No. 10. That's not the point. The point is, every one of them packed a bag, boarded a plane, and toasted to new beginnings without a second thought about the woman who sat beside them for over a decade of milestones. It's easy to paint someone out of the picture when you've already started rewriting the story. They had already decided who I was, the background character. The one who nods, who supports, who fades politely when the spotlight shifts. Maybe that's who I became. But it's not who I started as. I used to laugh louder, dream bigger, take up space without apologizing for it. Somewhere along the line, I stopped. But standing in my kitchen, holding that envelope with my name on it, something in me cracked open. Not like a break. Like a breath. I remembered what it felt like to be angry for the right reasons. I remembered what it felt like to want something for myself, even if that something was just silence. Honest silence. Not exclusion. Not ghosting. Not the polite knife between the ribs. I walked to my laptop and opened a new tab. I searched flights. Not destinations. Just flights. One way. No return. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew it wouldn't be here. Not here, where I had to earn love with patience and stillness. Not here, where friendship came with disclaimers and expiration dates. Not here, where I had to wonder what version of me they'd erase this week. I booked it. One way. No fanfare. No announcement. I closed the laptop, packed a small bag, and left the letter sealed on the nightstand. They would read it soon enough. But first, they'd come home. And I would be gone. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. Not really. Not in the way it used to when laughter echoed off the walls and the scent of Sunday roast clung to the curtains long after the plates were cleared and the wine had been poured one glass too far. It had become more of a museum of old choices, a display of the woman I'd once tried so hard to be for everyone else, the hostess, the peacekeeper, the backup plan. But now, with the quiet pressing in through every window pane, I moved through it like an artist preparing their final gallery piece, deliberate and steady, brushing away the dust of what used to matter and making room for something else entirely. I started in the kitchen, where my life had always seemed to orbit whether I wanted it to or not. I emptied the drawers with military precision, setting aside the heirloom utensils and the chipped mug Sandra once gave me during a particularly rough week with David. I paused on that one for a while, turning it over in my hand, noticing for the first time how the crack along the handle had spidered all the way down to the base. I set it in a box labeled Sandra and moved on without another word. One by one, the boxes began to take shape, small containers of curated memory, little time capsules of the roles I'd played in their lives. Claire's box got the scarf she'd always borrowed and never returned, along with a photo of us at the wine festival where she spilled Chardonnay down my back and blamed the wind. Amy's box got the joke book we laughed over for hours at the lake house, and a flask with a dent she made the night she swore off men forever, until the next morning, when she texted that bartender from the resort and left me to drive home alone. Sandra's box got the recipe cards in my mother's handwriting that I had once copied for her because she swore no one could roast a chicken like my mom did. That one hurt. I had loved Sandra the longest, I think. But love doesn't shield you from the slow slide into disappointment. Each box was like a confession I wasn't brave enough to say aloud. I didn't write letters to go with them, just the objects, speaking for themselves. I wanted them to see the care I had given, the quiet ways I had stitched myself into the seams of their lives. I wanted them to feel the weight of those things now, when I was no longer around to carry it for them. Lindsay, however, got nothing. Nothing. No box. No parting gift. Not even the necklace she once claimed was her favorite. I had thrown it into the trash the night after I saw the island photo. It sparkled mockingly against the banana peels and junk mail, but I didn't flinch. Lindsay didn't need a reminder. She had taken enough from me already: time, trust, the illusion that I mattered in her curated world of perfect optics and social choreography. She wouldn't be wondering where I went. She'd be pissed I didn't leave her something to twist into a guilt story she could cry about over lunch. In the bedroom, I sat at the edge of the bed with the envelope I had pulled from the safe. I opened it carefully, even reverently, as if it held something sacred. It was blank, just an empty shell of intention I'd never acted on before now. I placed it in front of me and began to write, not with anger, not even with sorrow, but with the strange clarity that comes when you finally decide you don't need anyone else to understand in order for it to be real. The letter wasn't poetic. It didn't beg for forgiveness or lash out with accusations. It was precise. It was honest in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be in years. I told them the things I remembered that they had long forgotten: quiet betrayals, slights dressed up as jokes, the way they only called when they needed something and never when they sensed I might. I told them I had stayed too long because I believed people would eventually circle back to kindness. I told them I was leaving because I had finally realized some people confuse being needed with being valued, and I was tired of pretending they were the same thing. I folded the letter, pressed it flat, and laid it gently on the center of my bedspread. Then I took the spare key, the one hidden behind the garden gnome in case anyone ever got locked out, and placed it right on top of the letter, like a paperweight on a story that had finally ended. No drama, no scene. Just a quiet door, closing softly. I took one last walk through the house, turning off lights, unplugging lamps, brushing my fingertips along walls that had once heard laughter and lies in equal measure. At the front door, I paused, not to second-guess myself, but to feel the moment fully before I let it pass. I stepped outside, pulled the door shut behind me, and locked it. Not once did I look back. When they came back from the island, tanned and giggling and still drunk off the kind of freedom you can only buy in bulk, the first thing they noticed was the silence. No texts from me, no sarcastic comments about their Instagram posts, no passive-aggressive thumbs up or late night. Glad you had fun messages that Lindsay could twist into proof I was still obsessed with staying relevant. Nothing. Just the cold, open absence of a woman they had expected to be waiting, like a coat left hanging on the hook, patiently enduring every season change. Lindsay stopped by first, of course, because Lindsay is the kind of woman who thrives on control disguised as casual kindness. She parked in my driveway like it was still hers to borrow, humming to herself, probably assuming I'd be inside, nursing some imaginary grudge with herbal tea and tissues. She knocked once, twice, then called out in that chirpy way people do when they're not sure if they're about to get caught in something. When no one answered, she tried the door. It was unlocked. She stepped inside and stopped cold. The house felt different, emptier somehow. Not in the way of someone moving, but in the way of someone who had already left. The kitchen was too clean, the living room stripped of the little things that made it warm. My scent was gone. The throw pillows were still there, but the soul had been peeled away. Lindsay called out again, louder this time, more irritated than concerned, because Lindsay doesn't like when people mess with the script. But no one answered. One by one, the others arrived, Claire, Amy, Sandra, and they moved through the house like ghosts visiting the site of a small, private haunting. That's when Sandra noticed the boxes. Neatly stacked, labeled with names only they recognized, waiting like little landmines disguised as gifts. No one spoke for a long moment because they all knew deep down they weren't just boxes. They were statements. Amy opened hers first, ever the bold one, always wanting to know before anyone else. Inside, she found the flask from that disastrous lake house weekend and the joke book I had once used to pull her out of a panic attack after her second divorce. She held it like it might bite her, confused, like the memory had been rewritten without her permission. Claire opened hers more slowly, already pale, already chewing on her lip the way she did when she was nervous. Her scarf was on top, folded with absurd care, and under it was a small journal page she'd written years ago, one I'd kept after finding it tucked inside a cookbook I lent her, full of anxious little confessions about how she hated Amy and thought Lindsay was fake. Claire looked up, but no one met her eyes. Sandra's box was gentler. Photos. Recipe cards. Little pieces of a friendship that had once been soft and safe before it was complicated by proximity to people who made cruelty look fashionable. Sandra started crying before she even got to the bottom. Lindsay, by contrast, had no box at all. And that, in itself, said everything. Then someone spotted the letter. It was on the bed, precisely placed, with a key balanced on top like punctuation. Claire hesitated before picking it up, as if it might burn her, and read the first lines aloud even though her voice trembled. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even sad. It was measured, like a verdict. I told them I remembered more than they thought I did. I told them the way it felt to sit across from people who called me a friend but treated me like a placeholder. I reminded them of conversations they had assumed I didn't hear, of glances exchanged when I walked into a room, of secrets whispered like I couldn't possibly understand context. But I understood context just fine. I had understood that Amy once told Lindsay I was dead weight. I knew Claire had laughed when Lindsay said I was the charity case of the group. I had known Sandra tried to defend me once, quietly, but was quickly shut down. And I had known, above all, that Lindsay had done something I wasn't supposed to find out about. Inside Sandra's box, tucked beneath a recipe card, was a single envelope marked private. Sandra hadn't opened it at first. She hadn't even noticed it until Amy pointed it out. When she did, her hands shook. She slid out the contents and went sheet white. It was a printed email. From Lindsay, dated 2 weeks before David left me. It was short, and it was cruel. A message to David suggesting that maybe Joe should find out the hard way and that sometimes being left is what it takes for a woman to get interesting again. It was forwarded by mistake. Or maybe someone meant to forward it and just waited for the right time. Sandra read it aloud. No one breathed. Lindsay tried to speak, of course. She said it was a joke. Said it was taken out of context. But the room had already changed. The air had shifted. The spell had broken. Amy stared at her like she was looking at a stranger. Claire looked like she was going to be sick. Sandra folded the paper slowly and said nothing. That's when David walked in. They hadn't noticed him standing in the hallway, not until he spoke. He asked if there was something for him. Claire handed him the last letter, sealed in a plain white envelope with his name in bold, even handwriting. He took it, opened it, and read silently for a long, long time. Whatever was in that letter made him pale, like he'd seen something dead rise back up again. He didn't say a word. He just lowered it slowly, eyes glassy and unfocused, and sat down in the nearest chair without even looking at the others. No one asked what it said. Not yet. They were all too busy realizing that the one person they'd spent months forgetting had remembered every damn thing. After the letter was read and the house stood silent, something shifted between them, not just in the way people look at each other when a lie has finally unraveled, but in the way a fabric tears at the seam, slow at first, then with a rip so final it cannot be sewn again. Sandra was the first to speak, her voice hoarse from silence or guilt or both. She admitted she'd known more than she ever let on, that she had tried, in her own way, to protect me from the worst of it, but every time she thought about saying something out loud, she got scared of losing the only group she had left. She said that once, years ago, she had pulled Lindsay aside and told her to stop making jokes at my expense, but Lindsay laughed and told her I could handle it. Sandra said she cried all the way home that night, and she had never looked at me the same way since. Claire broke next, blurting out half-truths and whole regrets in quick bursts of panic, like someone trying to plug a leak with a sponge. She said she'd only laughed because everyone else did, and that it felt safer to go along than to stand apart. She said she wasn't strong like I was, and that she'd always envied how I carried myself, how I could sit in silence and still somehow own the room. And then she said something that changed the temperature of the space completely. She confessed to something that had happened in Miami, during that party, the one where I was too tired to go, where they all went anyway and sent me photos the next morning as if I wouldn't notice the extra chair at the table. Claire said she'd kissed David that night. It wasn't some grand affair, not even a long moment, just one of those things people do when they're drunk and untethered and want to feel something that isn't dull. But still, she did it. And no one stopped her. No one told me. Claire said she felt sick every time I looked at her after that. And she was terrified now that I had known all along. She looked around at the others, but no one offered her comfort, not anymore. Lindsay, for once, had nothing to say. She tried, of course, tried to steer the conversation back to logistics, to where do we go from here, like it was a team retreat and not the fallout from years of quiet betrayal. But her voice didn't carry the same weight anymore. No one looked to her for direction. The room had turned on its axis, and for the first time in years, Lindsay wasn't at the center. She said something about how they needed to regroup, that they should text Jo, tell her they'd made a mistake. But Amy laughed bitterly and said, "You think this is about a missed vacation?" They didn't know where I was. And they wouldn't. Not for a while. What they didn't know, what they would only learn months later, through pieces and whispers, was that I'd checked into a retreat upstate under a different name, a quiet place built out of cedar and calm, where phones were discouraged and silence was sacred. The kind of place where no one asked questions and no one needed answers to be kind. I slept in a room that smelled of lavender and wood smoke, woke to birds instead of calendar alerts, and found, for the first time in years, that I could sit still without bracing for pain. I didn't leave them a forwarding address. I didn't check the group chat. I didn't scroll through their guilt or curiosity or confusion. I simply stopped being available to them. And in that absence, they finally began to feel the shape of what I had been, what I had given without question, what they had taken without cost. David's letter, the one they were all too afraid to ask about, stayed folded in his pocket for days before he said anything. When he finally spoke, it was only to Sandra and only once. He said she knew everything. That was it. No details. No elaboration. But it was enough to make Sandra cry again. He didn't tell them the last line of the letter. He couldn't. Not out loud. Not even to himself. "You always assumed I'd be here if you ever got tired of her. Don't come looking for me." A neighbor said later that she saw me leaving early one morning, bags already in the back seat, windows rolled down even though it was cold, and that I looked like someone who had finally exhaled after holding her breath for 20 years. She said I waved once, not at her, just out the window, like I was saying goodbye to something I didn't need to name. They never saw me again. Not really. Maybe I left for peace. Maybe I left to hurt them. I still don't know which is truer. Maybe it doesn't matter. Sometimes people confuse presence with forgiveness and absence with weakness. But absence, when chosen, is the sharpest blade of all. Maybe I overreacted. Or maybe they finally saw me for who I was when I stopped being useful.